Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, I'm the host here, and my guest today is Denise Bell from Lost City Knits. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Irina. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. The very first question I have for you, how is the girl from rural Oklahoma finds herself being in love with Shetland Place?
Ah, that lace was one of my big loves in knitting early on, and my husband and I were planning a trip, vacation, just vacation, to Scotland, and I said, it's not all that far to Shetland, and so I was on Ravelry, looking at some of the forums. And Hazel Tyndall, who was the Wool Week patron that particular year, said, well, if you're gonna be in the Highlands and think you might come to Shetland, come to Guild meeting. And I said, okay, yeah. So we kind of scrambled and added an extra trip to Shetland, left the Highlands, went to Shetland, came back, and really I fell in love with everything about Shetland, not just the lace, but the landscape and the people and the big water and the lack of trees and every bit of it. So,
Right.
and I went on from there, just fell in love with the traditional approach to the lace shawls that they use, that is vastly different than some of the other traditions, such as the Faroese shawls that I love, or the Estonian shawls and such.
Right. Well, when you went to Shetland, so to me, it's a fascinating place personally, because I feel like we have somewhat similar like cultural backgrounds. So Russia, where I come from, is also like heavily involved in, like they have rich knitting culture.
Mhm.
And it was also sort of means of making extra income in the families. Because it was also like a poor area, like struggling area. So, and it's also cold. So we
Right.
have all that in common, right? But like when I was talking to, I say that story often, but like my mom grew up in the family was like, they had 3 children, they were struggling. So my grandmother was extremely crafty and she could do everything and she taught all the kids how to do everything. But as soon as they were out of that struggle and out of that poverty, that was the last time my mom wanted to do anything with knitting, with crafting of any sort. So to her, it was always like that sign of poverty, that sign of need.
Mhm.
Then I was talking to Hazel Tyndall, who was saying the same thing, that like she's coming from large household. Basically, like every time she comes back from school, she has to knit because she has to help get some money, some pocket money for herself or help the family. Everybody was knitting, and here she is still knitting. And they're the same age as like Hazel Tyndall is approximately like my mom's age, right? So like they're the same generation going through the same experience, but completely different outcome. Like whereas Hazel Tyndall in love with knitting, teaches knitting, promotes knitting, my mother wants nothing to do with it, right? What's in Shetland near and dear to you? Like what spoke to you personally?
Well, I didn't grow up living rural. I grew up in Tulsa, which is a good sized city in Oklahoma. Um, and my mother grew up rural, but I love the rural life here where we live on a farm in Oklahoma. But the the lifestyle in Shetland is similar in that the crofts or farms provide a lot of things, but the people are genuine and kind, like rural people anywhere. It's a vastly different landscape. I live in the foothills of the Ozarks. So I live in the woods, with some pastures. And I love places like Shetland that don't have a lot of trees. I love the Mojave Desert. I love New York City. It's just visiting those places and getting to know the people and how they look at things. That's quite interesting. And, you know, it's one of the perks of getting to travel.
Well, so you came back from Shetland, not empty-handed. You came up with a bunch of ideas of what you're gonna design.
We did. I came back with ideas, and it wasn't a plan. We went one of the first days and visited Jameson and Smith, and had a glorious interview with Oliver Henry, and he walked us through the wool room, and I got to see things. And I told my husband, I said, I wonder if they would let us be a stockist, because, you know, we don't have a brick and mortar shop. And as on a regular basis, whenever I travel or whenever I come up with ideas at home, I'm always sketching and drawing things. And that's where inspiration begins for me. It's not with the yarn, but the tag team of yarn and what yarn to choose to make something move the way I want it to is part of that play and that dance that happens when you have ideas in your head. And so I came home and I kept drawing and sketching things out and thinking, well, if I did that, this yarn would work. Oh, this yarn would work. And it just developed from there. And that resulted in our first book, which is Ultima Thule, which is the furthest out, patterns inspired by Shetland.
So then your husband went back to Shetland to take pictures for that book, right?
Yeah, he's the photographer in the family, and the writer, and a lot of the interviews in the book. So during that period, we were also, right before he went back to Shetland, we were caring for my father-in-law here on the farm in his final days. And when my father-in-law passed away, we couldn't both leave and go to Shetland. And we said, Chris needs to go and do the photo shoot there. I contacted Donna Smith and I said, Donna, would you be my shawl wrangler? You know, would you work with Chris? And I mailed all of my finished shawls to Donna, and Chris flew over, and that's how it worked out. So,
right. So in that book, it's not only shawls, but there are a lot of stories about people who live in Shetland, and like you talking to them and interviewing them. And it's also like a lot of interesting stories about how they see all the changes in Shetland, that it's not as it used to be, and some of it is better, and some of it they're sort of nostalgic about the ages that passed.
right.
Was your reception there, like, was everybody superbly friendly to you? Like,
Oh, absolutely. They were gracious, you know, and open. And you know, when we were there first in 2014, you know, there were still the big ships in Lavender Harbor, the oil ships, and yeah, everyone was kind. And we were there in May, so not during Wool Week. I've yet to go to Wool Week. I have mixed emotions about that. I really love traveling off season when things aren't crazy. So everyone was really just open, and you know, at Guild, it was a regular Guild meeting, and you've got all of these knitters, and they're all wearing knitting belts unless they had moved to Shetland from somewhere else. And they were kind and gracious. And if I had questions, they were wonderful. There was an older woman. I was at that time really struggling to wrap my head around the process of a fine lace shawl, worked from the outside to the center, worked flat, and all the grafting that you and I know about. And I think I told Hazel, is anyone working on that? I really need to visually see it. And there was an older woman sitting in a chair, and she goes, talk to her. And I said, okay. And this lovely lady threw her shawl on the rug there at the Vogue Guild Hall and was stretching it out. And I'm on my knees looking at how she put it together to really cement it in my head how it was done. And what a wonderful gift that was to someone from the outside who was used to working lace on a circular needle in the round or whatever. And how kind that was to be willing to just, show how it's done. And I know that, as a teacher, and, I just finished up teaching 2 weeks of hardcore Shetland lace with a small sample to my stitches students, getting them to wrap their head around the approach. I don't think I could have done if it hadn't been for the kindness of that woman. So.
Right. Well, let's talk about your teaching career. How did you get into teaching Shetland Place?
Well, I teach a lot of things, not just Shetland lace. The first thing I ever taught was Estonian. I was teaching people how to do noops and star flowers on the fly, not in a classroom. I had a few designs and I wanted people to understand how to do that. And so I was walking them through how to do that in my yarn booth at regional shows. And it's still one of my popular classes on how to do noops and star flowers. And then, broaden that. And I was teaching at small shows, regional shows, and I was at a knitting retreat and was explaining how a noop and starflower evolved in a shawl that I had up during show and tell. And at dinner that night, one of my dinner companions said, you explain that really well. Do you teach? I said, I do. I said, whenever I get a chance. And she said, you should apply to teach for stitches. I said, okay, I'm a vendor there. Sure. And that was, I don't know how many years ago. And the lovely person who suggested that is Sarah Peasley, a teacher at Stitches and also a tech editor for me.
Right. So wonderful.
It kind of just evolves. And the story of that is that knitters, by and large, are kind and gracious people, and they want to spread that love.
Right. Well, when you teach Estonian lace or Shetland lace, so you have limited amount of time, because you the class is hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours tops. It's not a long class, right? How do you divide it usually? Because so much history of Shetland and history of Estonian, and to explain how the noops were developed to basically increase the weight of the shawls. So because the shawl used to be sold by weight, how much history you put into your class? How much do you try to educate people versus just showing them and knitting with them little samples?
I try and put as much history of it into the class as I can. One of the things that, thank COVID, that sounds odd, but because of being able to teach via Zoom during COVID, it shifted the amount of hours you get to spend in a class. I had 5 sessions of one class over 2 weeks for the Shetland lace class we just finished up. So they had a broad bit of time in between when they got to work on the long edging, and then they got to work towards the center. And there were nice breaks that allowed me to pace it. And sometimes where they're working on knitting those 20 repeats of edging or 40 repeats of edging, I talked to them about the history of the Shetland lace. I showed them how I use a knitting belt, and that plays into the construction process. And get to show that to them in these extended sessions. That's a lot of fun, which is very different than live shows that, you've only got 3 or 6 hours, and it's hard to fit much in. I'm appreciating getting to do it via Zoom and do that with students so they get a broader view. Having said that, I just started teaching via Zoom this summer. I lost a year because where I live in rural Oklahoma, we didn't have broadband. We didn't have fast Wi-Fi. Right. It was a little better than dial-up, but not great. And so it wasn't until a few months ago that I really got to resume teaching. And I'm really happy to be able to get to do it in this way. I have a class coming up starting in January that I'm going to spend 2.5 months walking through some students through their first sweater or their first Icelandic sweater. And being able to do it all online is really fun.
Right. How did you get into the yarn business? When did that happen, and what was that progress like?
Well, as an enthusiastic new knitter, a number of years ago, I learned to knit in 2005. So I haven't been knitting all of my life. I've been doing some handwork of some type, but I didn't learn until 2005 when my friend Danny showed me what he could do. Like the next year or so, I decided to go on a pilgrimage to the Taos Wool Festival. And I came home from that and I told my husband, I want to dye yarn. And he said, okay, what's the worst that could happen? And the thing that happened was we ended up having a hand-dyed yarn business. And I still dye. I mostly only dye silk, pure lace weight silk, because that's hard to come by. It wasn't until we went to Shetland that we began to import Jameson and Smith. And then we've added the Lopi Icelandic yarns to it. And I don't dye very much anymore. And part of that is because the mills that I used shifted from using just non-superwash wool to only using superwash. And I said, I like traditional wools. I don't want to use a superwash yarn. And so I dye less now, but I have found other great yarns to offer my customers. And that's a lot of where my interest fell anyway. So it was kind of meant to be, I think.
Right. Have you ever asked your husband if he regretted that comment, as of like, what's the worst that could happen?
I am not about to. No way, no way. He is involved in most facets of the business. When we go to a show, we're driving usually a big cargo van across the country to go to the East Coast or West Coast or down to Texas or wherever. And if I'm teaching, he's covering the booth with maybe a booth helper. And the photographs are all photographs that my husband has taken. And everybody knows his name. And sometimes they don't know me unless they've been in class, because I haven't been in the booth. But we've been very lucky to be able to do this, as a profession for a number of years now. I don't know what the future holds as far as live shows. I don't have anything booked live until next fall. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that evolves. I will tell you, I have loved being home for the last year and getting to see all of the seasons on our farm. So we'll see. He's involved in every facet of it. And I mean, he does all the work here on the property. He's involved in a barn renovation right now with a 100-year-old barn that's deteriorating and falling apart. And he's trying to get it into shape and keep it going, and running an Airbnb here on the farm so that people can come visit rural Oklahoma. So we seem to be, constantly evolving.
Right. So when you look back at 2005, and you think about the life before knitting, do you ever regret starting it? Because it seems like a completely different life now than it used to be before that, right?
Right. It was. When I met my husband 20 years ago, I was the bean counter for an architectural firm. And a few years after we met, I don't tell this story very often. Nobody's asked this. Very good. Local people know this, but my husband and I raised lavender, the plant, here on the farm. We had fields. And so I left my corner office to grow lavender. So that was our first business. And for a couple of years, we actually grew lavender and sold it at a farmer's market in Tulsa and a few little regional plant shows, and hand-dyed yarn. At some point, we decided we were really tired of growing a perennial crop, and it's not easy on the body. So our interest was waning there, and we decided to follow this track.
Right. How did Brexit affected you? Because you had COVID and Brexit together.
There were some questions for a little bit on importing the yarn from Shetland, and there were a few delays, and we had VAT taxes, and J&S changed their shipping policies and all. Honestly, not a lot. COVID changed things in that all of our travel plans stopped after we got home from Stitches West. And I did not have a heavy year booked last year, simply because my mother was in her final days with Alzheimer's, and I was already planning to had scaled back so I could be here for her. And that changed things. So when we had a few shows canceled with COVID, and we shifted to just trying to sell product online, and that was fine. I couldn't teach because we had satellite Wi-Fi that wasn't very good, but I hadn't planned on a heavy year anyway, so it was okay. It was fine. I think that the interest in the traditional yarns, as opposed to hand dyes, for a lot of our customers was shifting anyway. I mean, you've got the virtual Wool Week, and you've got Shetland Adventures Journal, and all of these amazing things, and customers kept shopping.
Well, I bet more people were shopping because everybody was stuck home and knitting much more.
They were. And, it's not uncommon for people to pick up that knitting during stressful times. And we all know the Elizabeth Zimmerman quote about knitting through all crisis. And boy, a lot of us did.
Right. Let's talk about your designs. So like you have such a variety of designs. You're not concentrating on just one thing. You're doing like so many different things. How do those come to you? Like, how do you decide on what you're going to design next?
It's purely based on inspiration. Anything that I design is based on something that has been a spark of a shape or a flower. The shawl behind me, let's get over so you can see it. This is the Kailyard shawl, and it was inspired by the gardening life in Shetland. And there are motifs of the rock walls in Shetland, the pollinators, the waves, because Shetland is an island. There was another design that I woke up from a dream that my front yard, which is a pasture, was a formal garden. And yeah, that's not going to fly. We'd already done lavender. We weren't going to do a formal garden. So I drew sketches and picked up some yarn and started thinking what motifs that would play with. And it became one of my very popular shawls. It's a large square with intersecting paths and leaves. And it's funny, the year I released that, and I can't even remember what year that was now, I sold a good amount of patterns. And the following year at DFW Fiberfest, I saw 5 Layla shawls, which is the formal garden shawl. I saw 5 of those live at that show in the wild, and man, that makes your heart soar. And the sweater I'm wearing is one that we were getting in the car to go into Tulsa for some reason, and it was the first snowflakes falling against a blue sky. And I said, oh, look at those crystal shapes. And that kept playing through my mind. And so I reversed it as white background with blue motif in Icelandic wool because it's soft and fuzzy, and designed a sweater.
So how did you learn the technical aspect of it? Because to design this, to see a picture in your imagination, that's one thing. To actually create a pattern and then create that pattern in extra small through extra, whatever, 3 extra large, it's
Right.
A completely different animal. How did you learn? Like, what was that learning experience like?
Well, good resources is important. I have great tech editor. I knit a lot of things that are not my designs. I learn from almost everything that I knit. If I'm curious about how something goes together, I'll find a pattern from a respected designer and tinker with it and say, oh, the things I learned while knitting that, I need to do this. I'm totally willing to take classes. I went to a wonderful workshop with Meg Swanson on yoke sweaters, and that really helped me develop things in my head. And, I've taken classes with Janine Bages, who does modern Fair Isle. And, I want to learn things, and I want to learn things from people who like the technical aspect and are willing to teach those either in a large overlooking view or in minute detail.
So when you wrote first book and then you went into the second book, what was the reception of the first book?
The first book, really great reception. We sold a lot of Ultima Thules. We still sell it. It's been for sale at the Shetland Times bookshop. So it's for sale. They may be out by now. I don't. We've sent a number of shipments there, but we've sold it quite a bit. Now we are self-published because fortunately in this industry you can. I mean, we've got forebears who have done that, like Kate Davies, self-publish her books. And you're like, okay. If I went to a publishing house, they wouldn't let my husband do the photography. They wouldn't let me do these things. I would have to get it printed who knows where, instead of at my local printer in Tulsa, who also put together a PDF for an ebook with every print book. So we had a really good reception. And the fact that, as you said, it's like a travel log as well. A publishing house probably wouldn't have let us do that. So our second book is called Deep Roots, Patterns Inspired by the Tallgrass Prairie. And we go through the Flint Hills of Kansas often, any chance we get. And it's exotic and beautiful and vastly different than Shetland. And the question we had was, even if Denise has great patterns, will people be interested in a book that also talks about the tallgrass prairie in Kansas? And they were. Yeah, we met amazing people. In the first book, one of my favorite people in Ultima Thule is Barbara Fraser, a lifelong Shetlander who, doesn't own a car, but drives a quad all over Shetland. She's just amazing. And interestingly enough, one of my favorite characters in our second book is another adult, middle-aged or older woman. And, getting to meet a woman rancher. And Jane Coger is just dynamic and interesting and very serious. And she was kind and gracious to us. And even after the book was released, we stopped by to visit Jane if we're in the area, and one of my favorite patterns is out of that book. I mean, the wing stem skirt is inspired by the frost flowers that happen naturally on the early cold mornings. This morning, I was looking at my kitchen window when I was putting bagels down in the toaster, and there were frost flowers just because it froze last night, and there was still liquid in the stems of the flowers. And people were receptive, and they see that the tallgrass prairie is just as exotic as Shetland.
Well, do you feel like there is expectation on you now to publish next book?
I don't let people put that on me.
Put that on yourself? Like, do you feel like, well, I published 2 books, I should, what I'm gonna write about next? What's my next idea?
No, I let inspiration lead that. There are a few patterns swirling around in my head. I have done a number of designs since then. I did a series of designs on the Sonoran Desert. And it started with a serape that I designed, and that is done in Fair Owl. It's just really gorgeous shading, and yet this traditional shape of the desert. And then I did vests, and then I did this and that. But I didn't feel the need to do a book. but there was a collection of those patterns. You know, I think one of the perks of not being a rock star is that I get to go at my own pace, and I get to say, I'm not feeling the pressure to do that. When the inspiration comes, you bet. If I need to, and the inspiration speaks to me, I will.
Well, when you design, so I mean, just like as a knitter, right? If I need Shetland lace shawl, that will take me weeks, if not months, depending on the size. If I'll need a sweater, it can take me 2 weeks. I can maybe even do it faster. So the amount of time that goes into design is probably also proportionate somewhat.
Yes.
And yet the pattern will cost approximately the same. Do you
Right.
consider that? Do you consider the fact that like to design a Shetland lace shawl will take you much longer, and there is much smaller market for it because there's very few people in the world who are brave enough to even try Shetland lace?
Right. Well,
Whereas if you sell a Fair Isle hat, you know, every second knitter can knit that. Do you keep that in mind when you design, or you just go by whatever came to your mind and you disregard all the commercial aspects of it?
I tend to, I mostly go on inspiration. I'm aware of the fact that knitting this took, I don't know, 6 months, and then test knitting, and then tech editing, and how many people will knit a 2,400 yard shawl. Turns out a good few, thankfully. Not as many will knit this as will knit a vest or a hat. And that's okay. I think there's balance in all of that. There's balance for all of us knitters. I mean, I will knit a hat, I will knit a vest or a sweater, and yet I most often have something lace on the needles as well. And I think that a lot of knitters, I know of only one knitter who is truly monogamous in her knitting, but I think most of us want a balance. And I know that it's less often that I'll sell a fine lace shawl pattern compared to Aran weight vest. It's okay.
Right. So we've met at the Fine Shetland Lace group on Facebook that Monique Boonstra organized. Love you, Monique. She always watches all my
videos. That is a woman who should be a rock star. And
right. Yeah. Well, so the question that came up in that group is, what's Shetland lace? So if you're not a Shetlander, or if you're knitting it with hand-dyed silk that you do and not Shetland wool, is that really a Shetland lace? What's your take on it? Like, you design Shetland lace, you teach Shetland lace, yet obviously you're not a Shetlander. Do you ever question your expertise? Do you ever question your legitimacy in that field?
Well, I will say that I'm a fan of fine Shetland lace. And I look back at, there's on the Shetland Museum website, there is one of the things I do give my students for any Shetland class. I have an addendum that has links to books and lectures, a day of authenticity at the Shetland Museum. And I suggest they look at those. And, those early Shetland lace shawls, the patterns weren't written. They were handed down by word of mouth from one person to another. And I tell my students that. And what I tell them is, I want you to learn the basics. I want you to know that, yeah, most of the Shetland Guild does not, SSK. They'll do a knit two together through the back of the loop or a slip knit pass over. What are your choices as a modern knitter, as someone from Texas or from Spain? What do you want to do? Understand and know the basics and ask a hardcore Shetlander what those are, as I have done. Email Hazel or Donna or someone I met there and ask them questions. And they're, like I said, very gracious. And, I've got one of my projects right now is a Sharon Miller shawl. And I'm not taking the traditional approach from the outside to the center because I've actually knit one of those. I want to do it a little different this time. And so I'm taking a different approach. I'm not going to say it's, a true Shetland lace shawl. It's knit with Shetland wool and it's this pattern. And, this was the inspiration behind it. And just educating people so they know that, especially with students, I think is the biggest thing. And telling them, if you want to understand a tradition, I can give you some basics, but here are some additional tools. Look at this website. Look at this book, the Shetland textile book, and understand the wool industry and the history and, how those shawls were sold. They weren't what the Shetland women wore. They weren't fine lace shawls. They didn't wear them. They wore a hat probably. And, giving them that information and not trying to represent myself as a Shetlander. I'm hoping that, my friends in Shetland appreciate that and understand that. Right. And I'm going to tell my students, go look at this.
Well, when I was interviewing in Unison, I asked her about that. Like, I know she is one lace knitter and it's one lace knitter's opinion, but I asked her, like, what was her take on that? And she said, like, whatever keeps it alive, it's all good with me, and like, there is this purity of authenticity of Shetland Place argument versus it's a dying art, so like the more of us spread the word and the more of us show to the world our work, to me it's like what you're doing is wonderful because you're promoting it even if you are not a Shetlander.
And if they're not knitting that Shetland shawl, that fine lace shawl in Shetland wool, then okay, because there were shawls in the Shetland Museum that were not pure wool, that they were a blend or they were silk, and that those things were traded when the fishermen stopped. And maybe that knitter traded some hosiery for a little bit of silk. And she spun that with her wool. So historically, there were not everything was exactly wool, because the ships that were coming, fishing ships that were coming in, brought things, and there was influence there. Just like when you're in Shetland, one of the things that you notice is that it's not so Scottish so much as it's just as much Norwegian, and you feel those influences. And you feel a little bit of Icelandic influences just because of the different islands in that area.
Right.
And how they connected.
So when you're knitting home now, first of all, you're teaching, you're writing books, you're designing, you're knitting. Like, how do you balance it? How is your day goes?
There are days when I don't knit. There are days that that I may package up wool to send out from the Lost City Knits website. But then I go over and I need to pick weeds out of the garden, or harvest some tomatoes, or plant some wildflowers in the east pasture, or yeah, there's not a true structure to my day. I have usually a calendar and my book with my notes of things that need to be done. And yeah, something may happen. You know, a dog gets bit by a snake and has to go to the vet, or, you know, anything. I like to keep some minor structure. I look at my notes usually in the evenings before I go to bed, and I look at them in the morning. Often in the mornings with Chris and I at the table, you know, we've finished eating breakfast and suddenly a conversation starts and it turns into a business meeting. And you know, plates get moved and we're making notes and talking about a plan, and it may be, you know, about, you know, workshops or something we want to do, and it may also be about things that need to happen here on the farm.
How does it feel to have a partner who is partner in everything? I mean, it's not just your husband, but he's your business partner, he's your photographer, he's your travel companion. He has like very many roles all in one.
He does. We're really lucky in that most of the time we can navigate those waters pretty good. We also do something that most couples might not consider, is that we can ride a tandem bicycle together well. So, you know, this is not meant for everyone, this type of having a business together. There are times, most of today he's been, you know, working elsewhere on the farm, and I've been working on things inside, and then we may be together working on something. You know, it evolves, and we're really lucky that we get along in that way. I have friends that say, no way can I work with my husband.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What's your personal yarn stash looks like?
It has evolved. I have a number of kits. So I have a few favorite things that I see at shows, and I used to shop at shows for something that was unique, or look for rewarding myself with a book. From having finished a book, I might buy an Alice Starmore kit. But my stash seems to be quite full of the yarns that I sell, but it's also full of some really interesting yarns. I just finished a Donna Smith pattern that used a yarn called Fairy Hair, that is an organic merino and a mohair rabbit. I mean, it's not mohair, but it's a rabbit, and it's just incredibly lush. And I bought that at a festival or a yarn show. And you know, I look for those unique things that, and I like things that I can get from the farmer. Yeah, those make me happy. I've got some Leicester long wool that I haven't found the right pattern for, that, you know, I fondle now and then. I also spin yarn sometimes. So I have a wheel, and I have some really lovely roving and fleeces.
Right.
So I would say the majority of my stash is like the yarns that I sell. There are a couple of pieces, a couple of skeins, not very many, of superwash yarns, because that's just not a yarn I use. But they're the traditional wools or things that I bought from a farmer really make me happy.
Does Chris ever question you on like why you buy other people's wool because you have your own business and you have your own things?
No, he's a good sport that way. Not really. And maybe because of what I pick, I don't know. Like I said, we used to, attend a farmer's market, and that was our Saturday morning. So we have that farmer's market mentality of our, dealing with the people actually doing the shepherding or growing the crops and all of those things. And there's a lot of that. Right. And understanding those traditions. So he understands where I'm coming from on that, because it's a shared history that he and I have.
So out of everything I usually need, probably like 90% goes to other people as gifts. But then there is 10% that I call my heirloom collection. And basically like all the Shetland Place belongs to that collection. So it was even a joke. So when my son was dating somebody, he was asking me like, why won't you give her Shetland Place shawl? And I said, well, she'll have to change her last name first.
Yeah.
So do you have your heirloom collection? Like, is there something that you would never part with?
It's a good question. I don't knit for other people often. I will knit for Chris, and I've knit my daughter's sweaters and a couple of shawls and Cal's. She lives in New York, so she needs warm clothing, and so I've knit her a number of things. Anything she or her boyfriend asks for, I'm game. I wear a lot of my things. I wear my sweaters. I wear my samples. Not everybody does, but I do. There are some things that I don't wear often, just because I want to keep them in some good shape in case they're going to be on a runway, in a fashion show or in the booth. But I cannot tell you how many people who have tried this shawl on, and that's fun, because they don't know how to wear it, or they wonder what it's like, and it's huge. And I say, here, and I put that on them. So, I don't know that I would say that I'll pass anything along. My daughter, poor thing, she's going to have to figure out what to do with it, is all I can say. If she wants to keep it, fine. If she doesn't, fine. That happens after I'm done.
You mentioned that there is like some of your favorite designers in the book. Do you have like an absolute favorite design, something that's like you think like your masterpiece?
A couple of favorites. The Kailyard is definitely one of my favorites. I don't know if I'd call it a masterpiece, but it's definitely one of my favorites. I love people's reaction to it. I was sitting in a bar at an event, and I turned around and did a double take, because there was a woman sitting behind me that was wearing one of these in yellow. So that kind of made me feel good. I absolutely love my wing stem skirt, which is a silk lace skirt with the frost flower pattern. I wear my, I've got this one. This is the Bari hiking vest, and I wear that a lot, just because it's easy to put on and it's a great layering piece. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a one favorite. They change. They change.
Right. Do you have planned for next year as far as designs go? Like how far Or how many designs do you work at the same time?
You know, it could be several at the same time. I have a couple brewing in my head right now, and they haven't quite made it into yarn yet. And there are sketches and there are ideas, and they just haven't fully developed. And I'm just not going to push it. When they come to me and I realize, oh, that, yeah, this thing that's been brewing, I'm ready, then I'll do it.
What do you think, like, is like from your memory, what's the longest design idea that you had that took forever to like become an actual design?
Oh, good question. The cover shawl in Ultima Thule is called Kishi, and I had ideas for it while we were in Shetland, and most of the ideas for that book came while we were there. And I was tinkering with it, and it was one of the last things that I knit out of that book. And the stitch pattern, which is actually fish swimming in lace, I just kept tinkering with it until I got it. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready to go.
I love that shawl, by the way. It's like, it's so beautiful.
And it moves, it just moves beautifully. When I see it, one of the things that hard for me is when I'm wearing something, I don't know how it moves. And what I like is at a fashion show, at some of the stitches shows or some of the other events, or at retreats, and I get to put that on someone and see them move. I'm like, oh, that was good. I like that. Where can I take that idea as far as the movement? And that reminds me what yarn can do, because it is not static. It's such a malleable technique, and the cloth can change, and especially for us lace knitters, I mean, we're really lucky.
Well, I love chatting with you today. Thank you so much for being a guest of my channel.
Thank you. It's been great fun.
And I'm gonna put all the information so how people can find you in the description of this video, and they can also get your book in PDF form on Ravelry, right?
Right.
Buy the hard copy, they can buy ebook.
They can buy a hard copy or ebook, and if they buy the hard copy, it comes with a download code for the ebook.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you.